Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Justice and Mental Health Collaboration Program, Data and Information Sharing Learning Community. This is the third session for the grant research partners, and it is on quality improvement processes. So we'll just do some brief welcomes and introductions. Don't worry, we won't go through the whole overview of everything again. And then we're gonna talk about quality improvement processes, informations, and have a discussion. And of course, really our goal for this is for you all to connect with each other. So we really want to encourage you to jump in and participate. So even, there's some content that Faye will deliver, but she's happy to make it conversational. There are a couple of slides where we ask questions, and we actually basically took the list of people who had accepted for this and just wrote a couple of names down to try to spark conversation, because I think the best way for everyone to get the most out of this is for you to hear from each other on what you are doing with your grantees, what the evaluations look like, and some of the challenges you might be facing. There's a lot of years experience on this call, so we want to make sure everybody is getting a chance to hear from each other. So I'm Sarah Wurzberg. I'm a program director in behavioral health at the Council of State Governments Justice Center. I oversee the training and technical assistance for justice and mental health collaboration program. I think usually Marilyn Leak is your facilitator for this call. In happy news, she actually has twin babies now, so she's on maternity leave. So she will be back later on for future sessions, but just wanted to share that happy news with everyone. And then, as always, we have Dr. Faye Taxman, who's a university professor and the director of the Center for Advancing Correctional Excellence at George Mason University. So we're just gonna skip ahead to slide 7, actually slide 8. So through this, we're funded through JMHCP Training and Technical Assistance with support from Department of Justice's Bureau of Justice Assistance. You can go to slide 10. So this is the third session, and then we also have our fourth session, which will be coming up in November. And so right now we're talking about quality improvement processes. The fourth session, we were planning on talking about using processes evaluations to inform outcomes evaluations. Hopefully that's still of interest to folks. And then we are actually planning on continuing some of this work going into next year. So we're gonna want feedback on what's helpful, what you would like to see, if there's potential interest in continuing with the learning community. So the grant, I think the great thing about this learning community is that there's 20 different research partners who are working with these 20 different sites in all of these different states. So this is in alphabetical order by the first name of the county, basically. So you can see there's just a number of states and different areas covered. So it's an interesting way for us to get a pulse on what's happening across the country, and also the researchers who are supporting this work, and for you all to meet each other. So I'm gonna turn it over to Faye to talk more about quality improvement processes.
Thank you, Sarah and Sheila. Okay, so what I'm hoping we accomplish in today's discussion is to think about the work that you're doing with the grantees as a means by which we can improve the quality of the work processes on site to actually deal with screening and assessment, assigning people to treatment programs, providing wraparound services, or whatever it is that brought your particular site to seek funding to demonstrate something new. So I have a few discussion set questions that we want to work through. And I see that we actually have here a raised hand. If you see on the chat portion. So I'd like to know how many of you have actually worked directly using quality improvement processes. And so quality improvement processes, for definition, has to do with using a structured way of having your team work through problem solving and testing out new ideas. Can you hit raise hands if you if you've had an opportunity to do quality improvement process? Well, I don't see any raised hands, so that's good. So that means that we can spend today talking about it, but also thinking about how you can build it into your particular organization and the work that you're doing with sites. Sarah, what happened to the change? Oh, there we are. Am I not able to switch slides? Sorry.
I think if you go to the bottom, you might be able to. If you go to the little arrows.
Yeah, it's not letting me.
Okay, well, Sheila can help advance if we're having technical difficulties. Sorry, everyone. And if anyone also, like, if you didn't figure out how to raise the hand for the quality improvement, there's also reactions. So you can do like a thumbs up, or we can do it in the chat box too if you have something to say, or just jump in too.
Okay, so I'm hoping that today will accomplish us by telling us about how you do your own work with the teams on site, how you might be able to think about the process we're going to go through, which is quality improvements. And then, also just kind of make sure that we're dealing with sort of the trials and tribulation of really doing funded studies in the constraints of a demonstration project. I picked quality improvement process because it's a technique that's very useful to integrate as part of the work of working with with practitioners. And it actually has the benefit of trying to actually improve their work processes or how business is done. Next slide. Okay. I thought we'd start out by just asking for, perceptions from the field. I wanted to hear from different folks on, what kind of struggles or what successes does one have in getting their partners to use research to improve their own operations. So we had 4 volunteers: Kevin, Victoria, Corey, and Ben. Does anyone want to start out by just giving us, their impressions? If not, I'll just pick one. Ben, I saw you on earlier. You want to tell us about any of your successes or struggles about getting partners to use research to actually pass the study, but actually to improve general operations?
Yeah, I don't actually quite recall volunteering for this discussion, but that's all right. So I apologize for my lack of preparation. Obviously, working with practitioners can be rewarding and difficult at different times. And I have the privilege, I guess, if you will, of being a former practitioner. So sometimes it helps to speak their language. And so I found it really helpful to go in and show them a little bit that I understand what some of their struggles are, and then kind of walk them through what they need to get that information. And then also, kind of try and demonstrate that there's something that can be done with it. I think sometimes it feels like come in and get a data grab and leave, and maybe don't know what to do with the information. So trying to walk people through, not only this is what we need to know, but this is how it actually impacts how you operate in the future. And oftentimes when you talk in that way, it kind of piques some interest, and then you're able to actually provide some of that. Sometimes obviously the data isn't great and you can't always answer all their questions, but at least you can kind of gear it toward what their need is and how you can meet the need that they're having at the time.
So one thing Sarah pointed out to me, people didn't actually volunteer for different questions. So my bad, I didn't quite get that. That so sorry to call on you, Ben, if you, uh, so I'm curious whether you also use these kind of teaching points when they're trying to answer questions, but they can't be answered because of the data, whether you then use that as an opportunity to talk about, in the future, what are some of the things that we need to do to be able to answer those types of questions?
Yeah, so sometimes that's a struggle because, historically, even well-intentioned departments struggle with a lack of personnel power. And if they don't already have a system in place that easily grabs some of this data, it can be very difficult to try and help them, pull that data out from what's in disparate places or not already being collected. And so, having not worked on a great number of these, it sometimes is difficult to get an agency over that hump of, we know this data is here, we know it's here somewhere, or maybe it's not here. How do we start collecting it? And it seems to be there's always an eager interest in doing that once they understand the power behind it, but getting some of the technical abilities or even just personnel time to do it can be a challenge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you. So Victoria, are you also on? I can't see. I don't see Victoria, but Corey, in your experience, what kind of struggles have you had in having practitioners use research to improve operations?
Well, I've sat with some CBOs to try to gather some data to do a little research on treatments, on like substance abuse treatment. I wanted to collect data on engagement, motivation, pre and post, and yeah, they saw it as an increase in their workload, and yeah, there were some choice words, and I was told during that meeting I should have had a safe word. So it can get interesting trying to get data and trying to work with people on research when they don't understand the theory behind it and why you're collecting it.
Right. And so were you able to get past that struggle?
No. In Nevada County, we don't have a lot of CBOs, so they can kind of pick and choose what they want to do.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so it's a little rough.
Well, I find it's always difficult, when people either have barriers or they're not sure they want to look at that problem. Yeah. So, which is, I think, part of the challenge, right? If people aren't ready to really look at a particular issue, they're not really ready to begin to dive into, trying to gather information about that particular topic. Okay, great. And let's see, is Kevin on? I don't see him listed. Okay, all right, so let's move on to the...
I think I see Brandon raising his hand.
Oh,
Brendan,
okay.
did you want to participate?
Yeah, I just had a kind of a follow-up question to what the last person said, in that the people mentioned that it was a large increase in workload why they weren't interested in doing it. But then he also said that maybe they didn't, understand like the power behind doing it or the purpose. And I guess which of those do you think was more of the issue? Like a lack of understanding where we need to just better educate people on why we want to do it? Or was it actually just the workload made it untenable for them?
It was workload. It's a small CBO, so they didn't have a ton of staff. And yeah, I was asking them to do like 2 or 3 assessments beforehand, and I think like 2 assessments after they completed it. So I did get a chance to sit with them and talk about the rationale behind the assessments and what I was trying to determine. And they said it sounded like a good idea. They just didn't have the staff at the time to implement it.
Thank you.
But so I'm just wondering, would that have been an option if you had the resources to bring in a research assistant to do that? Even if it was just for pilot purposes, do it on 10 people?
Yeah, it would have been great, but they're also worried about HIPAA and sharing data. So I think it would have taken a little work to bring in a research assistant or have somebody else do the evaluations. They weren't comfortable with people going through their files.
Yeah. Well, that's a tough scenario, right? Because if they're not comfortable with you helping to gather data or use their data, then, you know, I think the challenge there is really building that relationship in a way in which they understand, you know, and trust you as a researcher, that you're not out to, you know, you're out to really help them improve what they're actually doing, and not just out there to kind of, you know, get in their way or anything like that. So that's, you know, an important kind of framing that probably needs to occur in a lot of in jurisdictions, is developing that trust that's needed between the researcher and practitioner. All right, so let's move on to the next slide. So quality improvement processes. So quality improvement process, I'm not sure, I can't see many of you, I just see few of you, but some of you are around my age, and you probably remember something called total quality management, TQM, that was in favor in the late 1980s, early 1990s. And TQM was developed actually by the Japanese as a way of improving their production line to better produce high quality cars. Roll ahead a couple decades, and people now are using the term quality improvement process, and so not TQM, but QI. And the focus of quality improvement is to figure out where in the workflow are problems occurring that are bogging down the system, that aren't achieving the desired goals, and that, you know, need some refreshment in terms of thinking about how best to do that process. So in a quality improvement process, the emphasis is on really getting the organization to brainstorm ideas. And it sort of relates to what we were just talking about, is increasing the receptivity of the organization to thinking about, oh, we could do this differently. How could we do this differently? What should we be doing to do this differently? And all of those questions, what needs to be done? How can it be done? What would the new thing look like? All of those can be bundled into a quality improvement process. Now, what's advantageous about a quality improvement process is that you're working with the jurisdictions on their own teams as a way of empowering the teams to work through difficult issues. And I understand from, you know, what people have said thus far, some of the teams are two-person teams. Sometimes your teams are, you know, are basically only work on a particular topic for a short period of time because of the staffing in other in those particular agencies. But what's important here is that we want to empower the team to think about how they could actually make improvements. And that's what QI is about. Sheila, you want to move to the next slide? Okay, so quality improvement process, there are a number of different models out there. There's actually a really good website called the Institute for Healthcare Improvement that has a lot of information on it, IHI. And one of the favorite quality improvement processes is called Plan, Do, Study, Act. So the emphasis of the PDSA process is that your team that's working with you on implementing this grant is involved in the processes to be able to identify new ways of doing business or correcting the old style of how things are done. The PDSA process is designed to basically engage teamwork. It's very powerful. It puts the design and emphasis on the user. So even though they're overworked, even though they have a lot of things on their plate, the notion is they know their organization, they know the work processes, they know the issues better than anyone else. And so therefore they should be in the driver's seat. And the role that the researcher plays here is really much more of a facilitator to help them think through ideas, to use data that's available to assess how things are, and to give them opportunities to really test solutions. So, you know, PDSA is what often referred to as a rapid cycle process, which actually, to be honest with you, fits very nicely with the length of a BJA grant. Most PDSA processes are approximately 18 months long. And they're really designed to get the team to test out ideas, see if they can get a little movement on their problem, see if people become more satisfied with what's going on, and then and potentially redesign their system. So let's dive into the PDSA. So I want to open a question just so that we're grounded here. So I know, you know, many of you have been working with your teams. So what actually has worked in your justice and mental health collaboration advisory groups? What do you think has really worked well? And I could pick on people, or people can volunteer. Let's see. So I see quite a few people don't have their voice on, but let's see. Do we have Maria Townsend on?
Yes, I'm here. I'm sorry. We're going through renovation, so it can be noisy at times. So I put myself on mute.
So what's worked well for you in your working with your top policy teams? Or what hasn't worked well? What have you struggled with?
Well, I think what works well is when we share data. I think what we struggle with is sometimes when we don't have the data that we need. And then we go back to the drawing board and try to figure out how to collect that information. We recently, past year or so, have been collecting information on stigmas, which we think are so important to address when dealing with these issues. And so we've been collecting that information even through community town halls and meetings. And so it was interesting to be able to compare stigmas that the behavioral health, mental health team have, as well as the criminal justice team and stuff. And so seeing some of those disconnects, we were able then to really push to get mental health first aid trainings in with the police academy, with the criminal justice, current police officers as well. And then also we're working hard to, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. We're working hard to, I don't know, I lost my train of thought. So we were talking about the police academies, the police officers. Oh, we're going to bring back the lunch and learns that we had with the court, in the court with the attorneys and prosecutors and such, trying to help increase knowledge of our diversion programs and things, as well as our MAT programs and such, that we can help work together.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Thank you very much. Sheila, you want to move to the next slide. Okay, so I broke down the PDSA into a number of steps. We're going to go through this a bit quickly, but you can get a copy of the slides, and there's also a manual that I've given Sarah that on implementation that has a breakdown of these particular steps. So let's start working through the steps. The first part of the step is assembling your team. Next slide, please. So the goal here is to have what's called a vertical slice of the organization. You want everybody from the chief all the way down to receptionist. I would also highly encourage, if you have anyone with lived experience who has been provided with services through that particular organization, or who works as a peer navigator, you want to invite this cross-section of the organization. Why? Because you want the lens of different players. You want to see the problem from different lights. And, as Maria just basically talked about, when you have these different perspectives in the room, you're able to get a lot more accomplished. And that accomplishment can be from learning from each other. So you're building here the opportunity for people to basically gain respect across the aisles, but also to be able to work hard together to solve some pretty difficult problems. And oftentimes part of that problem is that people may not see something as an issue, or they may not understand that other perspective. So we recommend assembling a team that's a vertical slice of the organization. If you're working on two organizations like the justice and mental health teams are, you need to bring in both organizations and have them sit together to work through some of these difficult issues. A team should be no more than 8 to 10 people. Obviously, in a lot of communities, 8 people would be a lot to get to. And so you can have less people. But I would really highly recommend that you make sure you have people of different perspectives of the organization. And another tip, just to remind you, is also make sure that you don't have all the yes people, but actually you want some of those naysayers in the room, the ones that are a bit more difficult to try new ideas. Why is that important? Because you want the team to work together. I've been in many PDSA processes, and it's interesting. I always find the naysayers, the ones that start the meeting like this, like, why am I here? This isn't going to help. But by the end of the process, they're engaged. They're coming up with ideas. They're the ones that become the new champions. And if you can convert a naysayer to a champion, you've made some lifelong friends, one, in that organization, but two, you've also made some inroads into the culture within those organizations. Okay, Sarah, next, Sheila, sorry. Okay, so the biggest question is, what is the problem that you're trying to address? Now, everyone wrote a grant, and everyone thinks that these new resources that are going to come in is going to basically be the answer to the problem. But if you got your PDSA team together and you presented to them what they thought the issues are regarding, the ability to put in place a therapeutic walk-in center or to have a diversion program, you might hear different ideas about how what people think is the problem. So brainstorming and giving people the opportunity to say, well, yes, you know, we need a diversion program, but we can't have that program because, you know, the police department won't use it. We can't do it because there's no security staff at the, you know, at the clinic to be able to manage people. I mean, all sorts of issues come up. But you're able to then help people brainstorm the ideas. What is it that they could do? And you want to work on different things like, is there a different timing of how events should occur? How about the context of which events occurs? And what about the capacity to be able to actually bring this into play? So brainstorming is like a really critically important area. And it is part of basically allowing the team to learn from each other, but also making people responsible that they have to think of ways to fix whatever the issues are. All right, so next, okay. So you brainstorm ideas. And then you want to basically say, well, how do we know if this is really the issue? Right? Like, how many times have people been involved and everyone says, well, this is the problem and this is, you know, the reason we have this. But then when you collect data, we really learn that that's not the problem. The problem is much different than that. So I did a PDSA process a couple years ago with a probation agency, and the probation agency's main issues is that they had very few of their officers doing home visits, right? And so they started off, and you know, the managers basically said, well, it's because people don't like to do home visits. Right? No one wants to go into someone else's home. They don't want to go into probationers' homes. They don't want to be exposed to bed bugs. I mean, all the different things that could happen if you go into someone's house. So when they actually gathered the data, the story was very different. The story was more about the issue having to do with that there were a number of people who were on different types of medical leave, maternity leave, sick leave, and therefore there weren't enough staff to be able to do home visits. Another part of the story is that the only assigned car to that probation unit hadn't worked in 5 years, and they hadn't asked central administration for a new car for that particular probation office. And so, you know, people did not want to use their own car because one, there was a regulation that prevented that. So the data presented a totally different story. And, you know, the question is, how did we get that data? Well, we got the data because we did focus groups with officers. We also, you know, looked at logs that had to do with whether or not people were checking out the car. And we were able to come up with different, you know, issues and present that back to the group, and people then confirmed, oh yeah, it is, because we just don't have enough people to do these home visits. Or, you know, yeah, you know, no one wants to take their own car because they're not going to get reimbursed for their mileage. And, you know, people don't want to use their own personal resources. So having the data is really part of the ability to redefine what the problem is. Next slide, Sheila. So one of the issues is that oftentimes also when you're looking at problems, we want to solve the world's problems, right? So we want to solve all of the issues that exist. And the quality improvement process is better suited to really help people work on a smaller issue. And when they have success on the smaller issue, then they can actually tackle more more significant issues. So we oftentimes will do pipeline analysis or flow of cases as a way of getting people to narrow in to what part of the process do they really want to pay attention to. And so here we focus, we want people to drill down and not take on the world's problems, but actually take on something that's manageable. And when you actually do that by taking on things that are manageable, then you're able to make a lot more headway here. So this example that we provided for you is a common issue about case, case management, in which the case plan is not consistent with the results from the risk and needs assessment tool. And therefore, the case plans are a little bit irrelevant for the clients overall. So when we did brainstormings in a different project that I was involved in, where the case plan was not being used to be able to guide how to help the person make improvements in their lives, we drilled down into what was causing that, and we found a couple things. We found that that officers didn't understand what the case plan was about. They figured the person had the conditions from the court and they should just follow those conditions. And so, why have a case plan if the court is telling you something else? Another reason is officers expressed the concern that there weren't enough programs to be able to deal with some of the issues raised in the case plan. So those were some of the what are called intersetting or the organizational issues that interfere. But we also learned that there was a lot of pressure from outside the organizations. One issue, I'm sure many of you have had this issue in your own work, that the officers didn't feel that the treatment providers were responsive to their needs, that the officers really didn't feel their requests to get someone into services or to provide intensive services were met and open by the treatment providers. And then, another issue that was a bit outside the agency was the fact that there was a lot of turnover in staff, people being promoted, they're moving to different offices, and that created an inconsistency in how people use the risk and needs tool and turned it into a case plan. So those are 4 different problems. Question is, which one do you want to work on? A good colleague of mine, Shannon Magnuson, basically calls this narrow the problem. Select one and just work on one, because you can make more strides on one than when you spread yourself so thin and you're trying to deal with all the problems of the world. So the narrowing of the problem allows people to say, hey, that's low-hanging fruit. We can get some headway here. Let's do this first, and then we'll work on some of these other issues. And so you have to think about the PDSA process as a rapid cycle where you work on one thing, you make some headway, you then tackle another issue, you make some headway. So narrowing the problem makes it more feasible that you're going to get some traction, particularly in offices that are overloaded or they're, have a lot of competing needs, kind of working with people to identify which of these is really a pressing issue for them will get you to be in good favor with your particular organization. So anyone have an example about, how you started out thinking it was this problem, but when you got your data and you moved into that, you were able to actually narrow it down to a much smaller problem. I could try calling on someone again, but how about Lauren Stevens?
I'm trying to think of one and am blanking. I think I'm gonna have to take a pass.
Okay, not a problem. Sorry to put you on the spot there. How about Michael? I don't see Michael on the screen. He's on the chat box though. Okay, so what I will suggest to you, Sarah, I see in the box, put the PDSA participant manual that we put together, and it was designed particularly for supervision agencies. So what I would recommend is that you really focus in and look at this as something that may be some way to basically get some traction with your particular agencies. So Sheila, you want to move to the next page? Thank you. So one of the things that we've done as part of the narrow the problem with data is we actually ask people to answer the question on a scale of 1 to 10, how much they strongly agree with or disagree with different statements as a way of trying to get people to identify what are some of the stumbling blocks within their organization. So I just put an example here of ones that we've used in different studies that we've done. But the notion here is that you can actually get people, because sometimes in a group process, they don't want to be perceived as not being supportive of someone else or raise difficult issues. So one way of confirming the narrowing the problem is to actually design a series of 5 to 10 questions and just get people to rank them. That way you're getting feedback from the group anonymously, and you're not putting people on the spot. So let's move forward. Okay, so once you've got the idea of what the real problem is, now you get to brainstorm again. So I like creativity, right? I like thinking outside the box. I know I can drive people crazy with that sometimes. But I think here, you can use the brainstorming sessions as a way of resolving some of the issues about inadequate data, poor resources, how we're going to redefine the workload, what kind of role change do we actually need. And all of these, opening it up to the group, because you want the group to come up with solutions. In my example about the home offices, the solution that actually came up was that that particular agency was going to, they asked the regional director to identify a staff person who could help with the home visits because they were understaffed due to all the administrative and medical leave that people were taking. Now, as a researcher, I wouldn't have thought that that was a big issue, about who's the staff available, but they were actually were able to identify this as a problem and then to identify new resources that they could actually use. So that's an example of brainstorming. I like brainstorming sessions. I actually just participated in one electronically, and there's this software out there called Padit, P-A-D-I-T. You should put that in your little thing, because in this time of COVID now, Padit is a way in which you can do brainstorming, where you bring a group together and then they put their ideas there on a board, like a discussion board, and the ideas exist, and then people can synthesize them. But it's kind of fun, so it's like a game in some ways. Pretty cool software, you know. In these times of us using Zoom and all the different, you know, pathways, we're learning new techniques of how to engage people. And that was nice because that's also anonymous, and people didn't have to identify their ideas. So, you know, in a half an hour, we had like 50 people on this call. We had over 200 ideas that, you know, was came from the group. Okay, so Sheila, you want to move to the next one? All right. So a big part of PDSA is to identify what are the performance measures you're going to use to really sink in that you're making progress or not. In other words, you're gathering data at the front end to tell you what is the problem. And then you want to make sure that you have the appropriate information to gauge whether or not you're making any headway to put a dent into that problem. So in this, you know, you've seen this slide before when we talked about performance measures. And, you know, I like to use this slide because all the treatment interface measures that Sarah and myself and Katie Halbert did years ago are actually good performance measures that you could use in your organization. And even for your data poor organizations, you don't have to do all of the measures. You can pick the measures that are most relevant to your agency or to what the team is trying to accomplish. Sheila, you want to go to the next slide? So I know you all have seen this. I hope you've downloaded it. I hope you've digested it, hopefully even tried to use some of these measures. But these are all different types of performance measures that you can use to look at how well your system is functioning and whether or not you're making strides in the problem at hand. Related to these process measures that we have in our manual, go to the next slide. I know that last time we spoke about the Cascade as a way of looking at how well your system is functioning. So I raise this to you again to say, why can't these different decision points be performance measures? You know, why not pick a few of these and just basically say, we're going to use this as a performance measures. So, for example, if you're doing a jail diversion or police diversion program, and you want to know how many people are screened to have mental health issues, then the question is, of those people that are screened, how many actually start treatment? I mean, if you just had that one measure, you know, and was using that over time, that could be a real goal for you to be able to help the group understand how their processes are that affect whether or not people are engaged in care. So I'd like to hear from people. What performance measures are you using, or would you like to use, even if you're not using them right now? What would you like to use for the grants? So Mitch, I see you there. You want to give us some ideas about the performance measures that you use in some of your projects you're working on?
I think you're still muted, but we can see that you're talking, Mitch.
Okay. We usually employ mixed methods evaluation designs, and we try to balance offender recovery and public safety objectives. So towards that end, on outcome measures, we always have some indicator of recidivism, and then some battery, usually in index form of offender recovery, such as abstinence is indicated, perhaps like say 0 or 1 for dirty urine analysis. We have a lot of pro-social employment, educational attainment, treatment continuation, those type of indicators as well. As for process evaluation, sort of a little self-serving for me to say, but we primarily rely on the Justice Program Fidelity Scale that Holly and I introduced in 2014.
So do you use the Fidelity Scale as a performance measure to show people how they've done in terms of improving the performance of their organization?
Well, I mean, that's not really the objective of it. I mean, you could think of it that way in terms of looking at, say, midstream or mid-program indicators, especially in terms of things like screening, placement, engagement. But obviously, there's not outcomes until typically the funding period lapses, and then there's the follow-up period. But we think of process evaluation not strictly, but primarily in terms of fidelity. So we're looking at modality, adherence, and indicators of quality performance.
I mean, my own personal perspective, and we'll talk more about this, but in earlier sessions, we've talked about the value of process evaluations. To me, I think outcomes at the client level are really great, whether or not people come back to the jail, whether they are rearrested. But if we don't change any of the practice, or nothing really moves the needle on how services are provided, then we really have false positives about, these outcomes that, we're trying to affect. So I think my own personal perspective is within the grant period of time, one could be using performance measures to galvanize the agencies that are involved to work on difficult issues. And that's what the quality improvement process is about, is really picking a problem area and trying to drill down so that you can get those improvements. And I don't know if you've shared your fidelity scale with other people, but I would highly recommend you send it to Sarah, and she can. But it seems to me that improving fidelity on what you're doing is like, target number 1 to making long-term change. Because if the fidelity doesn't change, I'm speaking to a choir here, you all know that means that long-term, they're not going to make much changes in how things operate. So I like the idea of fidelity measures, because I think, that's a performance area. Sheila, can you go back to the prior slide? Yeah. Here we have, like in set 2, and I think these were some of the measures that Ben, you were thinking about, or Laura was thinking about, in terms of really trying to get the agencies to be interested in. And again, these measures tell us a lot about how well the systems work. I've been working with some people on a juvenile justice process where they screen kids for suicide. So, you know, and they developed a mechanism that if a youth comes into the juvenile justice probation agency and they're screened at high risk for suicide, that they actually expedite that youth in terms of getting access to mental health services. Well, we were looking at some data yesterday, and it was very interesting data because, you know, some kids, particularly Caucasian kids, had higher referral rates to treatment as compared to Black kids, right? So we were noticing that there might be some racial disparity in terms of the way in which the systems are working. Well, that led to a lot of conversations about what are some of the issues that might get in the way. And that's where data becomes handy, because you're able to actually raise those issues objectively without actually pinpointing any particular person that might, have some, that this may affect. So anyone else? I think if we go to the next slide, 20, yeah, keep going. I think, go back. How about, is Jessica on? Yeah, it looks like. Or Kate or Lauren, do you all want to talk about what performance measures you use?
Hi, this is Jesse Arnold. I'm working with Newcastle County. We are looking at the number of people accepted into mental health services. And so that is one of the things that we're very interested in, as well as the recidivism. And we're also tracking at what level of care people are going into, and then how they're progressing through that.
Mm-hmm. So you have a couple of performance measures, right? So referrals, and then, whether or not people placed in appropriate levels of care. Mm-hmm. And, the hypothesis is that if you make improvements on those two, you should reduce the number of people who recidivate, right? So we're looking at, trying to really deal with how people are managed within the system in order to get those expected outcomes. So that sounds really good. How about, is Kate on? Or, did we find you, Kate? But you're muted. Still muted. Thank you.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, great. Yeah, we have a number of different performance measures. So we are doing a program in the jail that is 8 weeks, and then follow up with referrals and community-based programming after that. So we're doing like a pre and post of the in-jail program, and then a 6-month follow-up and a 1 year. So we are tracking recidivism and things like that, but we're also doing a lot of, there's a number of different programs that are being offered in the jail with there's various outcomes that we're tracking that are associated with that as well. So like individual functioning measures, couple functioning measures, and parenting measures as well. That's being tracked in addition to like mental health, substance use, and recidivism.
And the parenting measures, are those tied to your program that you're currently doing, or?
Yes, so there's a co-parenting program being delivered in the jail. There's also a parenting program, like Parenting Inside Out, that's being offered inside the jail as well. So those are tied to 2 of the programs that are being offered.
Okay. And were people receptive to these sort of process measures as a way of looking at, how well the program's working?
People as in like the team, or people as in stakeholders or participants, or who?
Your team.
Yeah, the team's very receptive. The sheriff, this was actually kind of the sheriff's idea from the beginning. And so she's really on board with tracking, and the stakeholders are excited about the measures that we're tracking as well. So far, I mean, as with, I'm sure everyone, with anyone who's doing a jail program, with COVID, everything has been really tricky. So in terms of like data collection, everything's been a little halted. So we definitely haven't gotten the numbers that we'd like to see. So, I mean, we don't really have enough to do anything with analyses at this point yet, but hopefully, down in year 2 of the grant, whenever we get out of COVID, things will change. And I think it'll be, much stakeholders and other people will be happy to see that at a different state than it is now.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I mean, a lot of jails are seeing really drops in their population.
Exactly. Yeah, so it's been really hard to even get the numbers to sustain the program right now.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's, a consequence of the world we live in right now. So it sounds like, you're trying to build in some of these performance measures. Mm-hmm. I'm wondering if anyone has actually built in performance measures into the management information system that the agencies use.
We did a proxy scale for risk into the management information system, but we haven't done any of the other measures.
Mm-hmm. So, for example, in the Stepping Up initiative, one of the measures that they recommend is how long are people in jail. So the length of time in jail. And that is a good performance measure because it tells you whether or not your system is really working to reduce the length of time that someone's incarcerated. Particularly if you have pretrial populations and you're really trying to move them out, you can use the length of time in jail as a performance measure to help us really think about, how is it that we're able to, to make improvements in the system. So that's an example in Stepping Up of another good measure. And most jail systems, they have the date people come in and they have the date people leave. So it's kind of, if you can just convince them to program that, you could probably get some results by gender, by race, by, status, whether the person's sentenced or pretrial, so you're able to basically gauge whether or not the person actually, whether or not your system is having an impact using that one particular measure. Of course, that's also one of my favorite measures for treatment programs. How long are people in treatment for? That is usually a really important measure that tells you whether or not the program is engaging and keeps people grounded. Do others have example about other types of performance measures that they would like to use or have used in their system?
Hey, we within our court system or within our docket system over the years, one of the things that we have tracked has been kind of the time between arrest and between the referral to one of the dockets, and then how long before an assessment can happen, and when the assessment happens, how long before the person is referred or actually accepted to the program. So we've done a pretty good job of tracking all that. I think our issue is that I don't know where that information has gone. Mm-hmm. So, you track some of this stuff, but then it might go to the larger group, it might not, and then some of the programs that would be impacted by the outcomes nothing really happens. So I think one of the goals of this grant and of evaluating this grant is to try and improve that system so that when you have these outcomes that are really important, that you figure out why they're happening and what you can do to make them happen, to make the process work better.
Yeah, I mean, but I think, Lauren, you've just provided a really good example of how PDSA could be useful to your jurisdiction, right? So if you have a group of people who are working with you on this grant and you have all this rich data, particularly, and you might have a history of this data over the last year, 2, 3 years, maybe.
Oh, at least.
Yeah, you can actually start the group off by saying, let's look at the data. Why are some of these timelines, is this what we expect our time process to look like to move people through the system? And you can use it as a way of getting that group to basically say, well, I'm not pleased with this one, but I particularly like this area. We've done a good job here. We're not doing such a great job here. And then you help people basically come together and brainstorm what are some of the solutions to address some of these time limit issues. So without knowing much about the grant you're currently doing, I just added to your workload.
Oh, that's okay. Makes it better. That's the goal, right?
Yeah. But, I recommend you could look at the PDSA manual that Sarah put in the chat box and think about it. But it sounds like you have a gold mine of data that would be really, valuable for people to assess how well their system's doing and what areas they would really like to make some changes in. And again, empowering the group. And so it's not coming from you as the researcher, but you're really getting your grant coordinators and, representatives from all these different agencies to be able to kind of speak up and talk through some of these things. Great. Thank you for sharing that with us. Anyone else have any data that they've, performance measures that they've put in place? Okay, so today we're pretty much hit the end of our session today. I just wanted to remind you that in this step of, selecting a solution and then testing it out, having these performance measures are golden, because then you get your group to have a consensus. This is what we're trying to accomplish. Particularly in the world we live in right now, where people can't just go, into someone's office and talk to them, getting a consensus around what the goals are and where you're going to make actually improvements in those goals is probably one of the biggest advantages that would, could actually occur. And so the PDSA process is actually a model by which you could think about using that within your teams to get to different finishing lines that are important for, trying to make programmatic improvements. So does anyone have any questions about quality improvement process? I know it sounds pretty simple, but we all know when you work with groups, it's not as simple as, the steps that we've outlined here today. So anyone have other questions, comments? Sarah, do you or Sheila want to chime in, given your work at the CSG?
Yeah, I mean, I actually find that this is the hardest thing, in working with grantees over the past, 7 years and then state systems before that. This is really kind of the hardest piece to put in place in a lot of ways. And I found that for, a couple of different reasons. One, it's because there's a lot of different things being implemented at once through these grants. So you're doing a standardized screening tool you may not have done before. You're adding an evidence-based practice. You're refining your case management practice as well. And that they're doing so many different pieces that I think they struggle to suss out how to actually implement QA as they're starting their implementation processes. So it seems like there's kind of a gap missing, because when people are trying to implement, you're trying to get through the planning phase, you want to get to the implementation funds, and oftentimes they leave some of the QA pieces till after they've started the implementation rather than embedding it in part of the processes. But I feel like a lot of the struggle is just that they're trying to do so many things under these grants. So I'm just curious, Faye, if you have advice on how to break it down when they're trying to implement like a new assessment tool maybe and an evidence-based practice. Like they're just doing multiple things, which I think makes it's harder to guide people in doing processes across a number of things.
I mean, one of the things you can do when you form your team is you can then basically get people to take each of the things that people are involved in and give them to rank order the difficulty they think that is going to be, right? So if you get people to rank order it, then you get a sense of how much consensus is there about, you know, how challenging is doing A as compared to B or C. And so, you know, I'm thinking that part of the dilemma is really one of prioritizing what are you going to do first, you know, because under the PDSA model and narrowing the problem, that dilemma that you spoke to, Sarah, about trying to manage too many pieces, you know, that's a disaster coming your way, right? I mean, you know, so the question is, what are you going to do first? And I think in the PDSA process, by even having an open discussion with your team, you know, we can't take on 5 things at once because we all have real jobs too, right? And so, you know, it's really hard for us to do all 5 of these. So which of these 5 is going to generate the most for us as an agency? And I think having that discussion could be really, really beneficial within your group as a way of prioritizing what are you going to work on first, or, you know, what does the group feel is the most important thing to accomplish to really make this grant a success. And, you know, going through the steps of the PDSA process can be very helpful in that sense. But you got to begin by chopping off some of the problem and basically doing that narrowing process. Just do it sort of as the dance, right? Like make sure you can identify which of these is really critical. So,
yeah, and I think that might be the hardest part for some of these programs because they're funded to do all these things and then they want to do them all at the moment they get the funds. So I think that's helpful though in terms of just helping people to narrow and focus on what.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's a similar problem when you give, you know, a probationer or somebody a case plan, and the case plan has 12 action steps, right? Well, let's be honest. How likely is it for that person to do everything on day 1, right? And so, you know, good case planning, we always say, you know, prioritize, time things out so that people only have 2 or 3 things that they're trying to do at one time. And you have the life of the person involved in probation or in a treatment program to get to those other pieces. Same issue with systems. You can't do everything, even though you may want to do everything.
Yeah, and Faye, that was one of the things that I was reminded of when you were talking about Plan, Do, Study, Act, is, you know, through a system mapping process or some, a SIM mapping process or a system mapping process, actually. A large component of it at the end is to prioritize the different gaps or the different things that are seen. So everyone, all the stakeholders are on the same page in tackling the same sort of items. And it reminds me very much of the PDSA process that you just laid out, is really figuring out what are the different, narrowing it down, figuring out the different components and then prioritizing them. So you're all on the same page with what you're tackling and have the same priorities and the same goals.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think, the narrowing the problem is a huge issue. But it's actually, if we think of it not as, oh, we're not going to do the other ones, but we think of it more as, we're going to be successful. We're going to accomplish this, and then it'll make all these other things easier, I think that's one of the team building change strategies that people should really think about, is how better to do this. So other questions or comments? Sarah, do you have anything you wanted to discuss about the last session? Did you want to, should we brainstorm? That's a good topic, or people have other topics?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking too, Faye. So originally when we had sent you and what you had applied for, we had discussed that the session would be related to using process evaluations to support outcomes evaluations. And I'm just curious if based on these conversations, if that would be helpful, or if there are other topics that folks want to address with the group. We're really open to doing it anyway. If there's a specific thing you're grappling with and you want to have time to discuss it with the group, we can do some case study sessions. It's really whatever works for everybody on the call, or what would be most helpful. So whatever your thoughts are, we're happy to hear now, or you can feel free to chat it in or send via email too.
I mean, I'm wondering if also, if you wanted, we could, besides, thinking about the linkage from process to outcome studies, is also perhaps think about maybe some issues related to data collection when staff are overburdened. Because I heard that, I think, from Ben initially, if not Corey. But what are some of the strategies that we could think about doing to address those particular issues? Or, as I said, I'm a big brainstorming person, so I like opportunities. But, another issue that we have, is, how to help the change team understand what the research literature really says. Like what are the findings, and what could they expect from their particular grant that they're implementing.
Hey Faye, this is Jim May down in Richmond. Can you hear me?
Oh, hi Jim. Long time.
How you doing?
No see.
Yeah, I have too many animal noises going on around me to keep the mic open too long, including a pet cockatiel that's been going crazy for about 2 hours. But I wanted to commend this particular presentation. This was a very helpful one. I think you and I have worked together before, and I think that the overriding message of it's almost make it simple, stupid. Get it boiled down. You can't measure everything all the time, so you really do have to decide what's the specific problem you're going to focus on, which then allows you to free yourself up to just dedicate some time and resources towards that one particular focus. I think that was a very helpful message today. And then the last thing you just said, which I think would be good, because I think, as you know, our teams change over time, and we have different people involved in different projects. So sometimes even the institutional knowledge doesn't always carry over within an organization from previous projects and so forth. So I think the last thing you said about, what does the research really say? What are the real findings here, and how does that apply to this? I think that would be great.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think sometimes, look, that's why I use the example of, probationers, because we overburden people and we want them to do everything. And then lo and behold, they don't do well. So it's the same with systems. We overburden systems and then, they collapse under the weight of all of that. So I guess, I don't know, Sarah, Jim sort of voted for the idea about, how to get people to understand what the research says. I don't know if you want to put out a poll to the group and we'll see what comes up for, next time, or how you want to proceed.
Sure. I mean, I think we had 3 ideas, so I think we can potentially put that out to the group and see what the responses are in terms of those pieces. Does anyone else have thoughts on areas, those or others, that they thought sounded interesting or would be helpful to your work right now?
I'll just add, I don't know that, I don't know what all could be said about each of those 3, but it might be interesting given that we have an hour and a half to discuss several of those rather than just one.
Yeah, I mean, we could devote a half an hour to each one, if you think that would be helpful. At least to dangle some ideas, because as Sarah said, we will have some extra other sessions in the spring, so that might be an option.
Yeah, it seems like the overworked piece with COVID-19 is just so present. It feels like that one is at the top of everyone's plate, just from our discussions with the grantees. Everybody's doing 10 million extra things and extra protocols now. So that one feels like it's really present.
Well, and also people are doing new things because they're having to learn to work differently. Okay. So you'll let me know, Sarah?
Yes, we can send out a quick email and see if anyone has other specific thoughts, but I think we had a good idea also in just trying to do a little bit of discussion on all of them, and that also seems like a viable option too.
Okay. I'm game if you guys are.
But that means we need participation.
Huh?
I said we need participation if we're doing the 3 topics.
That's right. Because we're not going to let you off the hook. And we think it's better for processing to kind of think about, this in your own setting. So,
yeah, so we'll send an email out about that. And thank you to everyone for your participation and, going with our new Socratic method of calling on people. We appreciate everyone's, thinking on this. We're just trying to make these sessions as useful as possible. So also when we send out the poll, if there's other feedback or comments you have, we're happy to receive those and try to update it, because you are our audience for this and we want to make sure it's useful more than anything else. So thank you to you all for joining. Thank you to Faye and Sheila for your efforts on this session, and we will plan to speak with you all in November.
Right, and you get an extra 5 minutes to your day. 5 less Zoom meetings. So have a great night, everyone. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.